This is Archaeodeath, an exploration in the archaeology of death and memory, past and present, with Professor Howard Williams.
Archaeodeathlings. It's archaeology Professor Howard Williams here, and we're heading off to the distant past and far off galaxies yet again, but also in conversation with Dr. Adrián Maldonado. Adrián, welcome again. I think you're my first revisitor to the Archaeodeath interview series, but welcome again, Adrián. Please introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be back with you, Professor Archaeodeath. Great to see you again. I'm glad that we have this venue so that we could kind of conjure up a reason to catch up. Hi,
Yeah.
my name's Adrián Maldonado. I'm currently Project Curator at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. But many years ago, I was given the opportunity to do a year of teaching cover for Professor Howard Williams there at the University of Chester, and it was a truly life-changing experience. I was fresh out of the PhD, and this was my first big teaching gig on the road, and I managed to stay there in Chester for 2 years. And yeah, you can imagine how big shoes you have to fill with Howard Williams over here, but it was so much fun.
Just looking at my shoes.
and it was while I was there at Chester, by the way, that I started blogging about things that weren't just my nerdy PhD. It was about modern and contemporary archaeology, pop culture archaeology. All happened while I was at Chester, and it's thanks to you, my friend.
I didn't realise that, Adrián. I thought you'd been. Well, I know you'd done various other things when you were at Glasgow, but no, the actual blogging was a new thing. I mean, yeah, because I've been really so. Yeah, I mean, Star Wars is. I mean, you do. I'm sorry. We should say you actually do. You know, you're an early medieval archaeologist of great, everyone knows your work, but maybe just tell people before we get into the Star Wars thing, so people don't think you're only a Star Warsy type person.
Right. Yeah, barely a Star Wars archaeologist, really. It doesn't exist, as we'll talk about. But yeah, I'm an early medievalist by training. I got my PhD at the University of Glasgow a lifetime ago, and it was on early Christianity, death and burial. And so this was one of the reasons why it was really useful, a really great opportunity to go to Chester, which really specializes in early medieval archaeology and the archaeology of death, burial, and remembrance. So that was my specialism, as was then. After Chester, I came back to Glasgow to do some work on the early medieval monastery of Iona. And from that point on, I've been doing a lot of work on early Christianity, the archaeology, not just of death and burial, but of crosses, commemoration, gravestones. And then an opportunity in 2018 came to join the National Museum. And as an archaeologist, I mean, in Scotland, that's kind of where you want to get up to. So I jumped at that, and the project there was to reassess their Viking Age collection. So still within the early medieval period, but now moving into material culture for me for the first time. And that was a huge eye-opener. It was like learning a new language, and I'm still there to this day. So I worked on the Viking Age archaeology and wrote my first book. I call it my first. There will be more. Called Dimensions. It came out in 2021. And then I worked on the Galloway Hoard project after that for a few years. And I'm currently on a project reassessing, inventorizing, and helping to understand the very large collection of human remains at the National Museum, the Scottish Human Remains Collection. So that's my current work at the museum.
Thank you for that rapid but really rich summary of all the many achievements and ongoing projects you've been doing. But now let's talk Star Wars archaeology, because, yeah, I mean, probably inspired by your blog and various other people's writings about Star Wars and archaeology, and being on TikTok since 2020, following some of these media studies professors. Like my favorite is Dr. C, who's based in the East Coast somewhere. I can't remember where he's actually based. He roams around, but he does really great stuff on Marvel comics in popular culture, but also touches on Star Wars themes, and just seeing how these people are hungry for this kind of conversation of the intersection of our academic expertise with pop culture phenomena. And Star Wars is a massive phenomenon, and there's so many series, books, spin-offs. I've only just broke into the surface of it, and in some of my blogs. But your blogs, you've looked. I remember you looked at Rogue One. You've looked at the new Andor series, which is so rich in stuff, and you spotted so much I didn't see. And I thought, oh yeah, that's really interesting. So it's one of these things where you realise once you start dealing with it, we are the Star Wars archaeologists, really, aren't we? Because we and a few others are the people that are starting to dig into the pop culture and seeing the way they've been representing the past, but also the material culture. And I there's so many things. I've got a forthcoming blog post on the Bad Batch and Rebels, so I've got those drafted and ready to go, but I just need to, it takes a lot of work trying to think through. It's actually more work than writing about stuff I'm more familiar with in the sort of 5th to 9th centuries or whatever. But and people will pick me up on the tiniest things. I've got to get it right, or as right as I can. But my word, it's a complex world, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And there's always more there. And when I started blogging, so the blog is called Almost Archaeology, because the point was it was like a challenge, because I started teaching contemporary archaeology at the University of Chester, one of your modules there.
Oh, yeah.
It really sort of forced me to understand things about archaeology that I didn't really appreciate. And more than anything else, it's if your methodology works for the ancient past, it has to work for any material culture, including things that are roundabout right now. If it doesn't work in the contemporary period, when you have material culture and documentation, if archaeology is no use then, it's no use anywhere. And so that really challenged me, and I began kind of doing it almost like a joke. Can I make this into archaeology? Can I make archaeology out of this subject? And being a nerd, it ended up being very pop culture oriented, but originally I did things like I went to the lawnmower museum in Merseyside and said, how can I make this into sort of an anthropological look at lawn mowing over time? And it ended up sort of, that challenged me to kind of write things in a different way. But I ended up leaning a lot more heavily into pop culture stuff, because there's a lot of these themes: the Lord of the Rings, the Star Wars universe, Harry Potter, of course. All of these great fantasy and sci-fi stories inevitably have this element of the ancient past coming into the present. And what we do with it becomes very much kind of, it ends up being kind of bad archaeology for the most part. But there's always these themes that we can really explore. And I guess I can't view them not as an archaeologist. So I'm looking at these things and reading these books as a fan, but also as an archaeologist. And so that's what the blog is about.
And there's individual episodes or individual bits. If you watch these films, you can watch them and not notice any archaeological themes. And I frankly, even though I'd like to claim I have some knowledge of the archaeological record, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't think through, and I went, oh, I didn't see anything in that film. And then I rewatched it, I went, oh, that's interesting, and look at the way they did that. And so I mean, I've literally just gone through the Clone Wars and done blog posts, and there's 130 episodes. Can't remember how many there is. There's 133 episodes of the Clone Wars, and most episodes is fantasy world, fictional. There's a few sort of cringe. It's always the Eastern European accents and the Japanese accents that just go, really? Are we still doing this? With this kind of, second you have a bad guy, it's like, you will come to my castle, I am like Dracula. It's like, what are we doing? Is everybody like sort of some, anyway. Apart from those kind of stereotypes of recent history and recent colonial era, there's most episodes have nothing, and then you go, wow, oh, look, and then there's some really interesting thing. Your take is very much looking at some of the sort of post Empire, sort of the recent live action series like Andor, and I think that there's enough in those, isn't there, to explore. But the past is there always. There's the way to the past is on them, but they don't seem to know much about it, and they don't seem to have any mechanisms of learning about it. They're like the characters in the Star Wars universe are like sort of some modern online influencers going, guys, I found this thing called Google, and it tells me that there was a war called the Second World War. Let's talk about it. And it's that level, isn't it? They're struggling to find any resource, or I don't know. It's really
You're absolutely right. They're constantly stumbling upon the past, not knowing that it was there, not knowing that it was important or that it had any lessons to teach. And
Yeah,
inevitably, when they encounter it, well, usually in Star Wars, what happens is they find an ancient Sith weapon or an ancient Jedi text, and it's something that is very kind of tangibly affects the present. So it's like a weapon or a code or a map that
yeah,
allows them to do one transactional thing in the present. And that's kind of a bummer, but that is, going back to anybody who's written about archaeology in popular culture, that is generally how archaeologists are depicted in movies. They unearth unspeakable curses, to
yes,
quote in or like in the movies like The Relic or The Mummy, they
yeah.
kind of unearth things that are bad or evil, or they go back to the past to get something that will help them win in the present. And, it just means that the people that write these stories are interested in ancient things, in shiny things or spooky things from the past, but
Yeah.
they are not themselves archaeologists. I like to think, and I hope we can kind of get a little bit out of this discussion, that viewing these things as an archaeologist actually helps us understand things about their own stories that
Yeah.
maybe they didn't intend, or
Yeah.
that would actually, if you followed it through, enrich what they are actually trying to say.
Yes, absolutely. That's so crucial because most of it could be easily castigated as Star Wars. I mean, if I was going to do a soundbite, okay, Star Wars is heavily influenced by the standard pseudo-archaeologies of our time, of ancient civilizations, lost texts, lost relics, lost maps that lead clues. It's Treasure Island meets Graham Hancock. So I've got a picture of Hancock Muppets now with with Michael Caine. No, let's move off.
I want that
But
in my head.
no, but this idea, it is very much, it's the kind of tropes of pseudo archaeology. There's a mixture of spiritual. There's bits of zombie and resurrection stuff going on, and horror, particularly in the Clone Wars with the Geonosians coming back to life, and also with the Ahsoka series. You have the Dathomiri magic brings stormtroopers back to life, and this. So you have those kind of horror elements, but you also have this hidden knowledge and ancient times. But that allows us to get a much more, I think, nuanced way of looking at pseudo archaeology. It's not simply just a package. It bleeds into so much of real world archaeology and societies too. And we are dealing with a universe with thousands of species, thousands of different cultures, most of which are trashed and destroyed by the empire, or it seems by the republic before that, in different ways. And there seems to be layers of colonialism and imperial extraction. And in that sense, I think it is in a way that we can start thinking about our world and the messy relationship between our fantasies and our real histories. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's really
Yeah,
true.
I think, okay, the classic example has to be the use of Mayan temple complex
Oh, that's where it
in
all started.
Mala as a scene in Star Wars: A New Hope, the original Star Wars. The rebel base is on Yavin 4, as everybody knows. And when George Lucas wanted a suitably otherworldly, alien looking, but abandoned ancient place. See, the point was that this was abandoned forest moon that no empire would ever think of looking for a rebel base on. It's out of the way. It's completely abandoned. There's nothing there except these spooky pyramids. And there's no, and the fact that George Lucas thought about a suitable location for this and landed on an abandoned, not really, it's used as a tourist attraction, but not currently used Mayan temple complex from the classical Mayan period. He opted for that because in his world, he was looking for something that he would recognize as a lost people. An abandoned temple complex means something ancient,
Mm,
something discarded by history, a dead end of history. And he said, okay, let's look for something like that in our real world. And he
yeah.
went to the Mayans. And of course, now, after many decades, more than 100 years of archaeology, we know that the Mayan civilization didn't quite disappear, did it?
No,
And
no,
the
no, no.
Mayans the Mayans didn't disappear and die off or anything like that. So we know that the indigenous culture of these places is very much still there. But these temple complexes are of a different sort of stage in history there, and for various reasons. they are no longer used, they are no longer occupied, because of everything that happened after the 15th and 16th centuries, okay, because of colonialism. But the assumption that the empire, the galactic empire, has to work like our planet has, where there is imperialism and colonialism that routinely, normally creates these dead places, these lost peoples. It doesn't have to be this way, but this is the world that is given to us on Earth in the 21st and 20th centuries when these stories were written. And so for them, it's normal to have lost people and abandoned places and lost civilizations that are forgotten about. It doesn't really have to be this way. It's kind of importing our colonial, imperial, quote unquote Western values, the way things are now, and making it the normal state of affairs in any galaxy. And that's a bummer. But, it comes out of basically needing a recognizably ancient lost civilization, quote unquote, for filming.
Yeah, this is true. And I think that they've tried to subvert that in some ways, or one could be generous and saying that in some of the subsequent series, like you do encounter, in The Mandalorian, various planets with indigenous peoples where the Empire's only there to extract, some mineral or some resource, or and even in Clone Wars, there's episodes where you have indigenous interactions with, and they're very cliched, and they're very these are quite new series in the broader sense of things, but they're still, oh my god, are we really doing that? Oh, they're native, because it's like the whole Avatar thing, isn't it? Make them a weird color and give them some an African accent or something, and then they're indigenous, so there's also that aspect, but they've tried in some senses to problematize that and show the impact of on local people, but then often it does get into those noble savage tropes too, but
and always somebody comes in to rescue them from and so that's again recreating the conditions in our own and sort of imperial and post-colonial, well, not post-colonial, all colonial planet now, and kind of photocopying it and putting it out into the galaxy, saying it was ever thus and it will always be thus. If we had to rerun history, it would run this way again. There would be imperialism, there would be colonialism, there would be underdeveloped nations, and there would be the people who were born to rule. And that's a bummer. But you're right. I think the peppering in of these little references throughout the original trilogy is what leads to the kinds of Star Wars stories that we get now, which I've noticed really quite often, and this is in the Disney Plus era, the live action era, really quite often come back to ancient Jedi temples, ancient Sith caves, and things like, because it's these little hints and drips of information that you get in the original trilogy. This abandoned temple here, this ancient artifact there, and then they kind of flesh these out a little bit in the prequel trilogy in the 90s and the 2000s. George Lucas gives a few more hints about the history of the Force, and a few more hints about where Anakin comes from, and the parentage of the Skywalkers. And this generation, currently, the sequel trilogy, the Disney Plus TV shows, they tend to be really concerned with and then bring in these bits of the ancient past, because that seems to be one of the things that they are most interested in. They're trying to flesh out the history of the Jedi, the history of the Sith, and they're debating, was it good? Were the Jedi's the good guy? Were the Jedi the good guys? Were the Sith always wrong? And is the Jedi Order a tool of imperialism? Or were they a force for good in the universe? And we're interrogating those things usually by going back to these ancient temples and sort of lost civilizations. And I think the only show that has really done this well in a way that's actually interested in those lost people or threatened people has been the Andor series. They're the only ones. That series is the only one where you actually come to know some of these people for more than a single episode. They spend 3-4 episodes fleshing out the local culture and traditions of a planet called Ferrix, which is just an industrial town, and they're sort of mill workers, and they're kind of chopping down imperial ships, and they're repurposing those parts, and so it's very post-industrial kind of underprivileged, but they have this rich local culture, these traditions, their own language, their own funerary rituals. And so we spend a lot of time fleshing out Ferrix culture. The show opens with this enigmatic, the man who keeps the time, with hammering the anvils, and he does this dance, doesn't he? It's all, and you just want to know everything about that guy. We get no information on it. It's just there, and it's just there for you to kind of relish in the fact that there is a whole lived-in culture here, and it does. That show does that time and time again. We spend 3 episodes in Aldani finding out about their local culture and how that's being displaced by the Empire. We find 3 episodes. We find ourselves on the planet of Gorman, learning about their traditions, and we spend a lot of time on Chandrilla learning about their traditions and stuff. So that show is the first one that's actually interested in the people and ethnography and anthropology of people. And there is a bit of archaeology which we can come to, but it's really about sort of learning about those cultures and saying there are different cultures. The empire isn't just one thing, and the rebellion isn't just one thing. It's a patchwork, and that's a little bit more realistic than any other Star Wars series has done in the past.
I agree with you, but I would qualify in one sense. It depends on how you qualify, because you could argue, having just watched the Clone Wars stuff, how the arc is a much more fragmented arc. It doesn't have that immersive sense. I agree with you there. The Dathomiri and their relationship, though it's in some of the backstory, and that they come up in obviously Ahsoka again, you do get a sense that they are Force users, but you never get a proper qualification of exactly how their Force use differs. But they are like the enemies of everyone, and they've got their own agenda, and they hate the separatists, and they have dealings with Dooku, but they're almost that, and that comes out also in some of the Ventress spin-off stories as well, and in Bad Batch, but it's all over the show. You get it in fragments. What you're saying, I think, is really important, is that in Andor you get that deep dive into, in the era of the Empire, into those relationships. And the other qualifier I would say is, and I'm disappointed it didn't seem to be a success with fans, is the Acolyte, which of course takes us back 200 years before the Empire and then the Rebellion, to show how the Jedi behave, and they behave really shittily towards Force wielding. They are basically, oh, you seem to have the talent in the Force, you're a bit old, but we'll take you anyway, we're taking her, and they basically take one of the 2 twins who was away, and it caused bloodshed, violence, and then alternate narratives about who was responsible, and you find out, of course, plot spoiler, that the person you think is the sage old wise elder Jedi is the corrupt one. And then there's another layer hinted at further, and I think fans probably felt that was too much because it implicated Yoda in the whole mess. And I think they probably, this is what I think fans just flipped. They thought, no, we can't have that, no, but of course that does fit in quite well with,
I don't know. There's an increasingly loud voice that's saying, maybe Yoda should have seen a lot of stuff coming. There's
clouded the future is. It's always clouded, mate, because you're not thinking. Have a cup of tea and have an energy bar or something and do something. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that the fact that the Acolyte didn't do very well is for a variety of different reasons. The way it was released, the Disney Plus, the age group it was pitched at, maybe, I don't know. And there was like a complex sort of web of reasons why it didn't do very well. There's obviously a racial component. The lead was a Black female. And so that is in our sort of modern review era, that has a lot to do with it, but it's not the only thing. But I think it is interesting, pulling back, the fact that show was set in the past is what's significant. There is another Star Wars movie, there's lots of them that are always in development, that are rumored to be being made.
Oh yes, yeah.
James Mangold, who did Logan and several other really interesting projects, he is developing a story that takes place like 5,000 years in the past. So the origins of the Jedi, the first Jedi temple. And so I find it continuously interesting that every new project seems to be trying to deal with the ancient past in all these different ways. You know, every single one of them. And even in the modern day, as it were, the contemporary story of the Skywalker saga, the sequel trilogy, that movie, The Last Jedi, the second one, um, is also set on this ancient Jedi temple on
Yes.
which is, Skellig Michael, where Luke Skywalker is a hermit now. And people, people loved it or hated it. But I think the fact that it's set on this ancient Jedi temple, and that it's a temple that has an ancient Jedi library, and there's all these elements of sort of the origins of the Jedi keep coming up again and again and again in all of these stories, even ones that are about to be made. It means that now that we have our sequel, we have our saga, we have the whole Skywalker thing from birth to death, cradle to grave, fleshed out. Now the stories that people are wanting to tell, interestingly to me, are about what comes before. And really interestingly, are our narrators reliable? Are the authorities that we think, the people who wrote the histories, were they imperial? Were they Jedi? Were they reliable? Did they have the full story? That's kind of the story that we keep on telling. So now we're questioning whether Yoda, was right or wrong in all these various ways, whether the Jedi Order was a good thing. But I think what it means is we are interrogating the ancient past to say, is the present where it needs to be? And that is exactly what archaeologists and historians are constantly doing. So there is a sense that if you did have archaeologists, good historians and good archaeologists in this galaxy, things might be better.
They would.
You figured some of these things out before it became a fascist empire.
The popularity with this hunger for the past and the hunger of fans for more stories, does reveal so much about why people love archaeology in our world, but also they don't fund it, they don't resource it. And you see some of that mixture, that's that cognitive dissonance in the Star Wars universe, that these people are, as you say, they're not engaging with it, not investing it. You'd think the first thing the Jedi would be some serious archaeological field work into all the Sith temples, so they know where all the shit is, and they know what potential, what sort of dodgy characters might be sniffing around.
One thing that really came out to me when I was rewatching Rogue One, and I was blogging about it a few years ago, and then I rewatched it because of Andor again. What really jumps out is that all it takes is some conflict, a war, for people to forget thousands of years of Jedi history, to the extent that by the time we are in the original trilogy, everybody thinks Darth Vader is a ghost or a rumor or a joke. Everybody thinks, he believes in some hokey old religion. And then they get force choked and they're like, shit.
Oh, yeah.
But their opening state, despite the fact that he has sort of risen to the top and the empire is run by a Sith Lord, we don't know that yet. But the fact is, they have risen to the top by knowing their past and taking advantage of it, I suppose, but also in the war that led to the Republic becoming an empire, they have wiped out the history of their own religions, their own ancient past. And we see these Jedi temples absolutely knocked down. In Rogue One, they go to Jeddah. The temples are being ransacked by the Empire, no problem. We see toppled over statues, they're dead and gone. But if you read into the official canonical history, those temples have only been abandoned in the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
It takes one generation for everybody in the empire to absolutely forget everything that came before. And that's the perniciousness of this sort of fascist empire. The first they do is rip up the history books, demolish the temples, degrade and demean anybody who knows about the past, until you get to the point where in the empire, knowing about the past is like a party trick. It's something that rich people can do, and they're collectors, and that's it. Everybody else is like, what's a Jedi? I've never heard of the Force, or I think it's silly, or it's rumors, or it's fairy tales. It took one generation for everybody to forget this, because the empire, as we see through the 2 seasons of Andor, is very deliberately out there erasing cultures, civilizations,
Mm.
traditions. They're displacing people, they're committing genocide in other places, whatever they need to do to absolutely rewrite the past. And all it takes is one generation, and the whole galaxy seems to have forgotten everything about the past. And it puts them in a world of trouble because they don't know what the Force is, they don't
Yeah.
know what the Jedi are, and the bad guys are allowed to kind of make this into a way of controlling the entire empire.
May I reflect quickly on 3 points there? There are a few episodes that do address this in a little way. I was thinking of the Bad Batch episode, which I've just watched, of the episode of Sereno, where the Clone Force 99 go to Dooku's home planet, where he's got his and find this old man who's trying to. He has a record, this broken archive of his people's culture before the Clone Wars. So the Clone Wars have actually started that process. And even on Dooku's home planet, there are literally, well, they only meet one, but we imply there's a scatter of people who are trying to cling on to the history of their own cultures. And it also makes me think of how I don't know if you agree on this. The first series of The Mandalorian, I don't know if of Andor, forgive me, of Andor, where you see the backstory of him on this planet that's been devastated by mining. And later on, they say, well, the Empire destroyed that world, and there's no one left from, what's it called? Canary. Yes, of course. Thank you. But then you get the impression in that backstory, it's the Republic that are extracting all. They've got already massive mines there. It's a Republic ship that's crashed. So again, it's not. While I'm not disagreeing with you, the fascist imperial erasure of the past is a fundamental theme. There's clues to a deeper time extraction and decimation of peoples. And are those kids? Are they leftovers from shipwrecked? Crash ship themselves, or are they, there's still, I can't, maybe I just don't remember, but I feel there's a lot of unresolved.
That is such a good point. What, the problem is, well, the empire, they're bad guys, the fascists, the would-be imperialists, right? But in the age of the Republic, obviously they're the bad guys, they're going in the wrong direction. But what they do is create a climate of war, of conflict, of strife. They stoke civil wars, and they people into military engagements, which again ramps up the need for these crucial resources. And yes, it does mean that even people on the other side are forced to, for reasons of military expediency, ransack and forget their own past. And that's something that that the Andor series makes really clear. But yeah, it's hinted at in these other series as well, in Ahsoka, in the Mandalorian. What it does is it forces people in times of war to be expedient. And the first thing that's expendable are things like museums, temples, religious places. They're the first to go. They're expendable even amongst, the side that's fighting the empire. The biggest sort of real world example of this is something that I touched on in blogging about the Andor series. It's all these looted antiquities. Well, it turns out that the antiquities market today in our world is fed not only by people sort of ransacking tombs for profit, but it's their own people sometimes. Sometimes it's people who live in and around these places that are tourist attractions, or that are important sort of places in world histories, like the Holy Land, like Mayan and Aztec and Inca sort of temples. People who live around these places know that there is this huge seller's market, this buyer's market for antiquities, from tourists to dealers to art museums and art galleries. There's a huge market for this. And so they are, in times of war, forced to do whatever they can to make ends meet. And so they start digging up their own places, their own sort of heritage sites. And it's just to get by. And so it's a really sad state of affairs. There's a lot of blame to go around here. And you could always say, well, they've done it to themselves. But it's actually the climate of war, the sort of context of imperialism, colonialism, and invasion that is creating this time where we just need to get paid. We just need to live. And so people begin to loot their own museums. And you're seeing it every single day all around the world including now increasingly in Europe as well. The Louvre heist was the big story of last year, and that's just sort of people taking these antiquities for, the strip mining for pearls and for precious metals and gems, but it's to make ends meet. And these things are now being done to order because it's more profitable to have them on the black market than it is to show them in sort of free museums or ticketed museums around the world. So yeah, it's, times of conflict create this kind of strife, and it creates an environment where kind of the old rules go out the window. So it just makes everybody devalue their past.
Yeah.
And it just leads to bad outcomes.
I mean, it's hardly a surprise that fictional universes are reflections and exaggerations of not only our times, but our perceptions of our past. But the real horror for me that takes it too far, I mean, not too far, I mean, it's part of the fictional world. The horror for me is the deep time stuff of Ahsoka, where you're trying to deal with, like in Rebels, Ezra Bridger meets the Star Whales, the Purrgil, and then in Ahsoka, she negotiates with them as well to take them to an entire other galaxy. And you have, and the story, I don't think either story work in my opinion, but that's not the point. But the idea for me, the archaeological element is you're dealing with times before. It's so ancient that even Hoi Yang, supposedly the droid that knows how every single lightsaber he ever made or guided in the construction of over thousands of years of Jedi history, he has only heard folk tales about the Purrgils and their hyper, and he knows nothing. He's useless as a character, able to guide. We talk about AI, and you can just now go and get some guidance online for anything you do, and that's what they're promoting. Every advert on YouTube is telling me that I can simply, how would our hair look if I got a haircut? How would I look if I was 70 years younger or older or whatever? Everything is about, you can get assistance from, but this droid who's got supposedly like the knowledge of the Jedi for thousands of years, he doesn't know anything about how to help them solve this plot. And for me, he's the best character, but also the most annoying because
right. So here we touch on something that is really really spicy, I think, about the Star Wars universe. They do have experts, they do have people who know about this stuff, but they're always depicted as fuddy-duddies and kind of in their ivory towers, and they don't actually know what's going on. Anybody who actually knows something about the past is kind of sidelined, and they're nerds, or they're just after their knowledge for the sake of knowledge, not to help anybody in the real world. And so you have your sort of droid Hu Yang, who has the memory banks that could reveal everything about the entire history of the galaxy, but it's like, well, it doesn't matter. It's just facts and dates, and who cares? Howard, have you delved into a comic book series called Dr. Aphra?
Not yet, but she is an archaeologist working for the Empire, I understand, but I haven't gone into it, no.
So I haven't really gone into this really deeply yet. I've read a few comics because they were available in my local library. You and I are both parents of young children, and one of the things you do on a rainy day, you take them to the library, free books, keeps them occupied. They love it. I love it. I go to the comic book section, I see what's kind of happening there. And I'm a fair weather sort of comic book fan, but I'm not sort of out there buying every trade paperback as it comes out. But I picked up a copy of Dr. Aphra before. I know she is the only kind of named archaeologist in the galaxy that actually has a leading role. So her backstory is something that I'm exploring just now. I'm no expert, but for anybody who wants to delve into this, her backstory begins as an arc in the Darth Vader comics in the late 2010s. And then she became so popular that she got her own standalone series, which is continuing to this day. There's not too many comics. I think it is pretty easy to catch up on if you wanted to read them all. But there's also an audiobook that I'm just listening to now, which is called Dr. Aphra. There's an audiobook which is a sort of like an audio version of that character's story. It's just a story about her life. What's interesting about Dr. Aphra, as I understand now, she is a fully trained archaeologist. She has a PhD, hence the name. She got it from Bar-Leith University, which does have experts in archaeology, in history, in heritage, and all that these people seem to do is identify and evaluate ancient artifacts. That's all they seem to do. And people don't really care. And her dad was an archaeologist, and he dies because all he cared about was the ancient past, to the exception of anything that was going on around him. And eventually, it's like Sean Connery in The Last Crusade. All he cared about was finding the Grail, and he didn't care about his boy, who becomes a rogue archaeologist. The same thing happens to Dr. Afra. Her dad was obsessed with Jedi temples and the history of the Jedi Order, and it leads to his death in various ways, and she becomes an archaeologist too, but not a good one. She's out there for fortune and glory, and she is out there to kind of find ancient weapons, especially Sith ones, and use them in the present to kind of make her money. So that's the whole thing. And it's supposed to be real cheeky chappy kind of character. You know, she's not good, she's not bad, you know, and she's out for herself. And sometimes she works for Darth Vader, but sometimes she works with Luke Skywalker. But she doesn't really join up anywhere. She's not a joiner. She's out for herself. So she's a scoundrel, like the way Han Solo is presented to us in the first movie. But you know, Han Solo has this arc where he becomes, you know, one of the good guys. He's part of the Rebel Alliance. Okay, Dr. Afra doesn't seem to become either fully bad or fully good. She's always out for herself. And so here we do have one example of a real archaeologist who has come out of an academic institution, and constantly, all of the academics, all of the museums are absolutely taking the piss out of for being irrelevant, or being caught up in their own concerns, not worried about the present, and only worried about ancient artifacts and not about the modern day. And so we do have experts, but we hate them. We have experts, but they're irrelevant. And we have experts, but we don't need to listen to them. Okay. And so that's how archaeology is presented. There is archaeology in this universe, but it is such a joke that we might as well not have it.
Okay, I have a qualifier to that in the sense that in Bad Batch we do meet another character. I don't. You haven't seen Bad Batch yet, have you? No.
I've done the live action stuff, and I've done only comic books, so you can cover the sort of animated series.
Well, I just wanted to. I want to see how she is perceived, but I haven't looked into how other people have talked about her. But there's this character called Fee, and she's one of the few black female characters in the entire Star Wars universe before the Acolyte, and she is a cheeky treasure hunter. She called herself a pirate, right? But I haven't written up this blog post yet, but my thesis is that she is actually a much more responsible archaeologist, and that does map onto what you're saying. She's not trained. She doesn't claim to be an archaeologist. She calls herself, and it's a joke that she says, "I'm a liberator of ancient wonders." And what she does is she nicks shit from old temples and old places, and she's full of stories. So she's like a Captain Jack Rackham. Captain Jack Rackham.
After herself.
Yeah, she's a Pirates of the Caribbean kind. She's a female version of Where's All the Rum Gone type, but she's not obviously quite so. But she's quite. There's a moral compass with her. She doesn't kill people. She's not. But she is raiding ancient spaces, getting through the secret code of how to move blocks around to get through, and it's all a bit of a disaster. And she always says, "Well, it doesn't matter. It's just a story of trying to get it, and it's all part of the puzzle." She says when they're almost killed by another trap and stuff. And at the end, what you find out, the morality comes out, is you find that she is bringing these objects to a makeshift museum that she's calling the Archaeum on a planet full of refugees from the Empire. And the things that are in this Archaeum, in this ancient temple that she's gathering, it's only hinted at. She says treasure can be many things. I'm just reading from my notes. Most of the villagers on Pabu, this place, are refugees. Many of the items I recover are remnants of their cultures, and that's worth preserving. After all, I'm a liberator of ancient wonders. And I think that's really interesting, because she's mocking herself there, saying, "I just steal shit. I'm just a treasure hunter." But she's not. She is actually. She's all jokes and games, but there's a hint of at least an amateur an amateur underlay of care and concern for the displaced peoples of the Outer Rim and their cultures. So that's perhaps a very generous reading of her that maybe other people won't have recognized or agree with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is something that I got out of sort of looking at the antiquities that Luthen and Clea sell in the Andor series. So to catch people up, the two of the main characters are Luthen and Clea, and we are introduced to them as the owners of a shop of galactic antiquities and curiosity.
Yeah.
They sell to they sell to imperial senators and rich people, basically, and they're just trinkets, and they sell them because they're pretty, they're good to show off in your house. Basically, this is like window dressing for rich people, and that is a real thing. Rich people do like to collect ancient objects just to show them off at parties. That is the sort of reflection of the real world. But it turns out, looking for the source of these things, and this isn't at all explicit, I don't think. No. It's only when you try to dig out all of the different clues about where their antiquities come from and how they came to own the shop in the first place. You see through the flashbacks in season 2 how they got started in selling antiquities. And it seems to me, digging through all that, the point of my 2 blog posts there is that war creates this sort of situation where antiquities are freed from their context, and that's bad for everybody. But also, Luthen is out there selling these things, so he's part of the problem, or so it seems. It turns out he is very knowledgeable, and it seems to be he was knowledgeable about the past even before he became a general, before he defected, and before he becomes this sort of rebel spy master. He is really deeply interested in the past. He knows what these things are, and it turns out that it actually probably pains him to be selling these things, but he is having to do it to get to his end goal of creating a rebel alliance. It's his way into the halls of power. It's his way out of the situation where he's running away from his old life. First, it's sort of as just a way to get money, but then it becomes a way to kind of enter into the halls of power and get close to the people who actually know things. All right. So it becomes a bit of that. And it turns out that there is, if you look very closely, there are artifacts and there are things that come up again and again. And there are kyber crystals, and specifically blue kyber crystals and blue gems that come up again and again. And there are a running a sort of theme that you don't need to notice. But once you do, it's always there. So when you rewatch Andor, watch out for people dressed in blue or with blue artifacts. It turns out that Luthen actually wears a kyber crystal, a blue kyber crystal, around his neck. He wears it at all times. And we only know this because in season 1, he gives it to Andor and says, this is collateral, basically. If you need to, you can sell this for a lot of money, but I want it back. I want this back. And it turns out he wears this at all times. And digging around, they never tell you what this kyber crystal is, but we know that other blue crystals are Deveronian blue. And again, it's people on Reddit and sort of message boards that kind of did the digging and figured all this out. It turns out that this Deveronian blue that keeps coming up, these blue crystals, blue gems that come up again and again in the series, actually date to a time where the people of Deveron are fighting against a different empire. They are the original rebels. And so he's wearing this as a token of an ancient rebellion that failed ultimately on Deveron. But these were the freedom fighters of their time, and he is allying with them. That is kind of pondering the past and the mistakes of the past, the sort of dead ends, the doors that closed of the past, that are inspiring Luthen to absolutely get rid of this empire. So it's his knowledge of the past that is fueling his fight against the empire now. And none of that is explicit. It's just kind of dropped in little hints. It's only viewing it as an archaeologist and sort of paying attention to the antiquities and the little drips and drops of knowledge that kind of opens these doors. And again, I have to thank the Redditors for kind of digging this stuff out. They're the ones that figured it out.
But it's a bleak world, but it's a world where the past matters, but the past is obscure. So the only real historical discourse moment you get is the argument between Krennic and Mon Mothma when they're viewing the what's his name, Skeldon's collection. And meanwhile, I'm so stressful watching that scene. It's just like watching Lonnie and what's her name? Claire trying to remove the spy device or the monitor. But that's not the point. The point is, while that's happening, you're having this petty little argument, like two people in a pub arguing over who won the Second World War, or something like that. But it's the equivalent of, well, at the start at the Imperial Academy, we were taught this was a great and it's like it's ridiculously the dialogue now, I don't think quite it's so on the nose. It's ridiculous. No one would actually have that conversation and not see through it reminds me of a Quentin Tarantino film. It's too stylized, but it works in that sense of revealing that the past does matter to these people. They're different. The conflicting narratives of who were the rebels, who were the heroes, who were the enemy, who were the bad guys, who were the and that is rare. And it's in a room where the objects are sitting, but they don't talk about the objects. And so at one level, it's like they're not. This is the material evidence that could speak to your narratives, and here you are but that's very true of the world I live in. I've seen that many a times where I've been literally standing next to a 15th century tomb, and I've heard someone say, well, we don't know anything about the 15th century, and I'm going or whatever it may be. Or I went to the Staffordshire Hoard in Birmingham recently, and someone said to me, so are these all real? You seem to know what you're talking about. And I said, well, that's a reproduction, right? That's the helmet. That's a reproduction. These fragments in tiny little conservation boxes, they're the real fragments. All right. And she just and she wasn't, not ignorant, but she didn't quite navigate all the images and all the text and hadn't got it right in her hand. She heard and she thought she'd generally ask. And so I'm not mocking someone. I'm just saying, but there's that tension there that in a fictional world, you got the material and
I think that Andor series is making a real critique of museums and artifacts and antiquities experts even today. And so just because we have these objects and just because we display them sometimes in museums doesn't mean that we actually are saying the right things about them. And museums now are currently grappling with this, not as much as they should, but because we have these objects and they have been displayed as these treasures for a long time, but having these objects and knowing what they are and where they came from, knowing their provenance and how they were taken, is actually, it allows you to tell a different story if you allow those people to give their take on this. You can have the object saying this is a beautiful treasure of a lost civilization, and that same object could be interpreted by a different set of experts by saying, yes, it may be that, but the fact that we have it here is because of colonialism, imperialism, looting of antiquities, and the displacement of, indigenous peoples around the world. And it doesn't have to be that way. So just having the antiquities, just having the artifacts is one step in the process. But knowing about how they got there, being an expert in exactly how these things have come to be in museums and what a museum even is or does in modern society, that's important, even more important, you could argue. And so that's a conversation that is happening in real life. And you see it playing in microcosm in just this little scene, which is, played as kind of a mini action sequence, a real tense thriller there. But actually the subtext of that is the conversation that we're having about objects in museums to this day. So again, one other reason why the Andor series is really grappling with antiquities, with the displacement of people and the effects of war, colonialism, and imperialism, better than anything else in the galaxy.
As usual with these conversations, there's a resist. I think we've resisted it reasonably well, but there's a tendency to focus on how the discipline is perceived and are we being represented? And of course we're not, any more than an Indiana Jones film. That's not really the point. But I put it to you that from what you're saying, it sounds like not only is the past important in the Star Wars universe, if poorly understood, but there are some characters that are almost archaeologists. There are some almost archaeologists in the way they behave. They're not there, but there's hints. Is that a fair sort of summation?
Yeah, I think so. I think they are there. We need to listen to them more. But do you know what? Sometimes they are able to play a critical role completely unspoken and unsung, like Luthen, whose name we didn't know
No.
anywhere. It's not mentioned anywhere in the 50 years of Star Wars lore until now, because that's deliberate. He burned his decency, he burned his past, as he puts it, in order to be in the place where he is. So he's had to destroy his own heritage. Andor himself, Cassian Andor, has had to erase the fact that he's from Kenari in order to get by. Because if people knew he was from Kenari, they would be able to find out who he was and identify him. So these people have had to deliberately destroy and displace their own history in order to advance in a time of war. So they are there, but we don't listen to them, and they're generally they're generally kind of made fun of, seen to be kind of external or something that's nice to have, but actually we can get rid of it when expediency demands.
And for the fans and for the archaeologists, I realizing that I'm still learning, because only having watched Rebels after watching Ahsoka, I realized that all of the intro and all of the outro and all of the symbolism on the megaliths links into the Lothal rock art that you see in Rebels, where Ezra Bridger works out, it's not very clear, he's working out how to access the Force and control the Star Whales so that he can save Lothal from, and I'm very frustrated by the storyline, but again, the past, he has no clue of it. He has to kind of work his way through, and it's still not properly resolved for us as viewers what on earth this is all about, and how deep time these stories are. But the rock art is a clue. It's another. It's like that hilarious scene in The Mummy 2 where he's trying to there's a sort of series of narrative scenes of how to use the stuff of Ra to kill the Scorpion King. It's very childish type, as if murals actually do that. Use it like this, like an IKEA assembly manual.
It's the Indiana Jones superpower. His superpower is knowing everything about every part of the ancient past. He knows all the dead languages. He knows how to read this. He knows and that's his superpower. That's how he gets ahead. It's knowing about the past, and only very few people know about the past. And this is, maybe we can kind of end on this. This is bigger than just sort of fandom of Star Wars, although that's, I think every archaeologist goes down the path of archaeology by being a nerdy person first, and so they are fans.
I deny everything.
And to be fans of, I think that's something that kind of joins us together, whatever that may be.
That's true.
But I think the wider story here is that in all of these sci-fi and fantasy stories, there are people who find out about the past, and that gives them the keys to succeed. And it's always the people who know about the past are, they kind of misuse it, they abuse it to their own ends. And it's only when the good guys start reading about the past that they kind of figure out exactly what to do that actually saves the day. Indiana Jones, of course, Gandalf, Frodo, Frodo, Bilbo, nobody knows that this ring is anything more than a little trinket until Gandalf goes to the Library of Gondor, finds out what this all was. Nobody in Gondor knew that the ring was out there. Nobody cared about this ancient trinket. They just kind of figured out the necromancer, who cares? He's just some guy, some trickster out of the woods, It's only when Gandalf starts reading about the past, educates themselves, realizes what they're dealing with, then they can actually go and save the day. The same thing happens with Harry Potter. The only people who know about the past are problematic guys like Dumbledore, and then the bad guys. And so it's only when they go to Godric's Hollow, when Harry and Hermione start reading about the Deathly Hallows and they start reading about the ancient past, they educate themselves on what these things are, and then they can finally triumph over the bad guys. The same thing happens again and again in every single story. In the Game of Thrones universe, in Westeros, everybody thinks that prophecies are naff and they don't have anything to do. Meanwhile, the zombie army is massing in the north. And it's only people who take these old stories seriously and they educate themselves about history and archaeology and the surviving artifacts like the ring, like the cat's paw dagger in Westeros, and all of these different things. It's only when you find out what these things are, why we have them, where they came from, that's when the tide begins to turn. And you're seeing that in every one of these things. If we have a united pop culture legendarium right? A body of mythology that characterizes where we are now. That's one of the key stories, that knowing about the past is important, and it stops us from sort of devolving into fascism. It stops history repeating itself, and we need to do more of it. So please listen to your archaeologists.
And although some archaeologists never listen, they open it regardless. Don't open it. But, so that's the flip side, isn't it? Archaeologists are sometimes the instruments of setting all things off and causing all the problems. But we are also the salvation, potentially, that the ignorance will bury us, knowledge will hopefully liberate us in some way. And that applies to many people and many places and many times. And yeah, I think that's a great way to finish. Thank you so much, Adrian. Hopefully we can chat again at some point. But this is hopefully.
We didn't even get into the sort of the archaeology stuff, as in like the props and the whole world sort of, displaying things in museum versus private collections. My God, there's a whole other interview there.
I don't know enough about that, and I would love to talk about that as a separate thing, because that is fascinating, isn't it? Because it's all about material culture, from action figures to to the actual the selling of the props and the display of the and the settings, the sites. We talked about Tikal, but we didn't talk about there's so many other landscapes, and it's a rich.
The history of movies and TV shows is leaving a real material trace.
Yeah.
And that is wider than Star Wars. It's wider than anything else. It's about pop culture. And does it deserve to be preserved? And does it belong in a museum if it's a lunchbox from the 70s? Well, we could talk about that. That sounds like a different conversation. But yeah, anytime, Howard.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much. We'll put in the description some of the links to your blogs and mine, so that people can follow up. And there are some publications out there that have addressed some of these issues. So I've always tried to pay due credit to other academics who've done work, and I'll try and compile or augment my existing list so that there's a proper bibliography, which is the one good thing about YouTube, is it does allow at least some quite substantial space so people can follow up on our chat. If they're bored of hearing us, they can read what other people have to say too. But thank you so much, Adrian. It's been a real pleasure. Good luck with all your ongoing exciting early medieval and related projects, and human remains. That's really important stuff. And I hope we can chat soon again.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity again, Howard. Always a pleasure. Keep doing what you do.
Follow ArchaeoDeath on YouTube, TikTok, WordPress, and a host of other social media.